Welcome to Guided, helping you navigate your divine journey. I'm JODI REYNOSA, your host. If you are new to the channel, welcome. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell on the top right so you can be alerted to all the latest and greatest interviews that I have for you. In fact, tonight you're going to absolutely love the interview that I have for you. We have Sky Nelson Isaacs. Sky, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jody. It's great to be on your show.
I've been waiting for this for quite some time, so I'm excited for you to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about Sky, but before I do that, and before I read his bio, I want to kind of tell you a little bit about how Sky and I met. Now, Sky is an expert in synchronicities, and we're going to talk about two of his books, one being Living in Flow, and it's called The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. And that was released February of 2019. But the way that he and I met was kind of a synchronicity. I was with one of my best friends, Arthur, and we were in the Silicon Valley. And we were actually talking about the energy of the Silicon Valley. And I thought, you know, there's just kind of some interesting energy. It's really kind of a covert, you know, there's like a lot of covert government projects. I would say there's like some ET type stuff going on, just really experimental, maybe with some space programs. You know, we were just kind of talking about that kind of stuff. And then
I don't know any of this story. This is great.
Yeah. So Sky walks up and says, I feel like I need to introduce myself to you. You know, I'm Sky Nelson Isaacs, and, you know, I'm a physicist. And I actually have a book called Living in Flow, and it's about synchronicities. and it was so funny because part of the conversation that Arthur and I were having, it was about synchronicities as well. So just the way that the universe works and bringing people together is beautiful.
Yeah, I think of it like a weave. We were woven together in that moment.
We were, yeah, the beautiful tapestry. Yes. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with all of you as I read Sky's bio. Okay, so let me share that. So Sky Nelson Isaacs is a theoretical physicist, speaker, author, and musician. And talk about musician. Oh my goodness. He plays the piano, the guitar. He plays like so many different instruments. He's a singer-songwriter. He's amazing. He has a master's degree in physics from San Francisco State University. He did his thesis in string theory, and we'll talk a little bit about that because Sky has an opinion on that. And he did a BS in physics from UC Berkeley. And Sky, he's dedicated his life to finding his own sense of purpose, beginning as a student of the yogic master Sri Swami Sachi. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, but Sachidananda. Did I say that right, Sky?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay. When he was less than 5 years old. Wow. Discovering an early fascination with holograms and some of the most fundamental questions in physics. He has sought for over 2 decades to establish a connection between synchronicity, physics, and real life using research and original ideas. An educator with 9 years of classroom experience, Nelson Isaacs is also, or Sky rather, is also a multi-instrumentalist, as I just mentioned, and professional performer of award-winning original music compositions. And we will get into the fact that he just released Stand For Me, his new album. And wow, I've heard one of the songs that I just absolutely love, and it's just so relevant to what's going on today. So very, very exciting. Now I'm going to switch over to his book, Living in Flow. And we'll start off by talking about that. But flow, living in flow, you know, harness the principles of synchronicity and flow to live better, work smarter, and find purpose in your life. That's really kind of the underlying purpose of it all. And here, as you can see, it's sold on Amazon. The paperback is $12.79. You can also get it on your Kindle for $12.99. So believe me, after we start talking about this, you're going to want to go get it. It's beautiful. Okay. So back to Sky and I. Sky, let's just jump in. We want to talk about so many things, from what's going on in the world and, you know, your expertise in synchronicity. And, you know, we've talked about, and I've seen some of your videos, which it's so awesome, but the world as a hologram. So kind of talk about all of that.
Yeah. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. You're so thorough and generous with your praise, and I really appreciate it. I feel
Absolutely.
grateful. So I'm here to talk about choice. That's really the most important piece of my message. We are always making choices, and much of the time our choices don't go the way we think they're going to go. So,
Right.
I think what we're trying to do is get better at making choices. We make choices that might help us in one way, like make us more money, but hurt us in another way, like take away our freedom or our time or our dream. Or we might make a choice to go for our dream, but take away our chance to really make money. Or whatever the balance is, we might think that we're trying to make a conversation better, diffuse an argument, and yet we make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we really touch into what is the impact of our choices?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I study this, my first book was about synchronicity and how the choices we make connect in some sense to a future state, a future experience that we're going to have. Or there's many possible future experiences, and the choices we make build momentum towards one or the other of those types of experiences. And so you can think about this with intention. You can think about it with hopes, or whatever different personal experience you have with how you make choices. But ultimately, I think of this word, anticipation of experience.
Okay.
You're always anticipating experiences.
Do you believe there's an overarching blueprint, and then what's malleable would be our choices in how to get there?
Yeah. And the model that I have in my mind and in my work is a tree. And this is such a beautiful symbol, right? It shows up in everywhere, like in our brains and neurons. The galaxies are actually arranged in a network-like structure. So from smallest to biggest, there's the tree shows up. And of course, trees themselves are the most precious symbol we have right now. They're the lungs and the life savior of the human race, I think. So the tree is a very important part of important image in my mind. And what it shows us is that there's this blueprint, right? The big tree that we're on. We're always at the base of our tree. And this, no matter where you are, at you sort of frame your life right now, it's at the base of your future tree. So from this point on, there's a blueprint for what could happen. And the choices you make are determining a sort of a probabilistic weighting of each of those branches. And as you make consistent choices in the same manner over and over again, like you keep trying to build a business, keep taking actions to build your business, over time you will move to a part of the tree that has a lot of what I call apples, a lot of fruit. And you might not have been successful yet, but you're actually building a likelihood or a tendency for one of those apples to suddenly show up in your life. And this is really the key point where it becomes a new theory that it hasn't really been shown to be true yet, but is something that I'm trying to support with evidence and theory. When the apple falls in your lap, that's a synchronicity. That's like when you and I met. I was going down to meet people at this meetup that was happening down in San Jose, which is a little bit of a drive from my house. And this was a new community for me. I'd been there twice, I think, and this is my third time. And I'm on my radar is, okay, what's going on here? Who's interesting to talk to? Not really interesting, but who can I have a conversation with? Who's open to, me walking up and saying hello? And you weren't even part of the group, but we had sort of had the meetup, and the meetup was ending. And then I noticed there were some people at the bar. So I walked over to the bar and started listening, and I heard what you were talking about, and I just dove right in because of that. I heard the words, I saw that you were friendly, and that was my natural way I just knew that there was a connection there. So that's a piece of fruit that fell into my lap at the right moment. So
how much of that, Sky, how much of that, not to interrupt you, sorry, but how much of that is almost like an auric field match? You know what I mean? Where it's like, there's some type of signature match in the energy field where it's like maybe even subconsciously, you knew somehow there was some energy connection where you needed to come say hi to both Arthur and I. You know what I mean?
Well, let's even expand the frame a little bit.
Okay.
I always know that there's something there for me, because there's always something there for me.
Okay.
So I'm always looking around. Okay, what's next? What's next? And the way that I frame that for myself is this idea of relationality. I want to throw out the idea that there's an objective world in which you and I are both having our experiences, and therefore we have to somehow communicate across space and time and read each other's minds in order to be in the right place at the right time. What I'm suggesting is that from my experience, my world is what I can interpret right now in front of me. My world is the physical world that I'm experiencing. And this is very much modeled like a virtual reality experience, where the virtual reality is rendered from my point of view. Like, that's the game. Now, it doesn't mean that your point of view doesn't exist. But if I want to take your point of view, I have to leave my point of view behind and take your point of view and say, okay, from Jodi's point of view, there's her world, and I'm just a branch of her tree. And so I don't want to think about it like you and I are both trying to find our way to each other. I want to think about it like, in my point of view, I'm standing there. How did Jodi get into my path? Great, here she is. I'm going to make an introduction. And same for you,
So
you're having your experience.
Yeah, and I like the way you open it to a broader sense where you're not cutting yourself off and saying, oh, let me go in this direction because I've kind of pre-planned what I want or how I think things should go. You've opened it up to all possibilities. However, I do think when you're at least for me, when I'm in a situation, say I'm assessing a room, I do feel certain people's energy and I tend to gravitate. I don't know if it's because, like I was saying, there is this certain like energetic signature where it's like matching, whereas it could even work in a negative sense where you can trauma bond with people.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So there's something to that, I feel. Even if like maybe your intention is, I'm going to open it up to all possibilities. For me, I've tended to gravitate towards certain people, not even meaning to, but it just kind of happens. Well, there's the first thing. Second thing, how do we make sure that we don't allow past experiences to be the driver of our future?
Well, I think those are connected. Like when you say trauma bond, you're allowing your past traumas to guide you.
Right.
So one thing that's kind of hard for me, but so valuable, and you might laugh about it, is, this is maybe what you'd call intuition. For me, I just touch into, what do I really want right now? What sounds fun? Because usually that's the thing I'm repressing. So the more I can tune into, well, what would be nice right now? Well, what would be nice right now is to go stand at the bar and have a drink and talk with these people that seem really, really friendly, and maybe not talk about business and not try and network, and that's exactly what it turns into, business and networking, but it's because of that fun instinct. So going where we're called in our hearts.
That's such a good point. Such a good point. In fact, Esther Hicks, Abraham Hicks, I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they talk about following your bliss. And that bliss feeling, that bliss energy is going to take you to so many fun places. Right.
And so the main phrase that you can take away today is the cosmos is responsive. That's my perspective. And that's what I think my work shows. We follow whatever is driving us. And the more authentic we can follow of a drive that we can follow, the more useful the outcome will be. And then the cosmos responds to that by saying, okay, on that tree, there's this possibility or this possibility or this possibility. I'm going to try and bring those to you. I'm sort of speaking, I'm personifying the universe for a moment, if I can do that. Yeah. It's not totally legitimate, but, but here's the options that are available to you if you do that. And if we're paying attention and we're coming from a place of inspiration and excitement and love and curiosity, then the things that come up, well, first of all, we'll notice them. And second of all, they'll be useful for us in some meaningful way.
I agree. So with the different layers of the way, we even talked a little bit about this, this tapestry and how we all seem to be woven together in certain ways and dimensions, and maybe just even experiences in life, not just this realm, but other realms. So for those who believe in past lives, it's almost like they're layered on top of each other. And sometimes we might even circle back to be with a person or have relationship, whether it's friendship, romantic, otherwise, and we're in each other's circle or orbiting each other again, whether it's to learn another lesson or to clear something, whatever it is. But there are some who believe that we spiritually travel with a group. so that we're spiritually progressing with that group and evolving with that group. It's almost like we go through spiritual growth spurts and various things together with a soul group or a soul tribe.
Okay.
So I find it fascinating where you almost have these recognitions of these certain people when you meet them. And it's just like, why do I feel so strongly about you? Why do you look so familiar to me? Why do you feel familiar? You know, how would you explain that?
Well, that's a really deep question. And it makes sense to me. You know, my views on this cuts really to the core of some of my views that I have. I don't know that I've expressed lucidly or not. So the space that I describe in my work is an information space. It's saying we have, what we know of is 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. So that's space-time. And that's what Albert Einstein studied when he brought relativity into being and merged those two, space and time, together. And then you've got all sorts of theories like in string theory where you might have 10 or 26 dimensions, but I'm going to just push those aside for the moment. We're just talking about what we know. I've got a 3-dimensional glass and it still exists, and it existed a minute ago. So that's time. So it's definitely a 4-dimensional glass. Okay. A film strip is a 4-dimensional object because it contains, well, it's really 2 dimensions of space, right? Because it's flat. And then there's a dimension of time. So the information space that I describe is what's called the Fourier transform space, or the frequency domain version of that.
Okay.
And this is what got me into science, into this field when I was in college, because I got the chance to build a hologram and I started studying the Fourier transform, which is how music is converted into sound, or sound is converted into frequency, so that you can look at, okay, what's the high frequency? What's the low frequency? You can make changes in the frequency domain that affect all of space and time. So there's this holistic relationship there that fascinated me from the very beginning. In the same way that you can take a hologram is like a 3-dimensional looking piece of film. You look at it and it looks like there's a 3-dimensional object, and you rotate your perspective on it and you see all different angles, but it's just a flat piece of film.
Right.
You can cut that in half and you can look at the right angle. You can still see the whole thing in there. So there's a way in which the wholeness of it is present at once, not in its individual pixels.
Right.
And that just seemed to me like a form of magic, or the next big breakthrough that we could make. And I started, so we'll get to how I see time from that perspective, and coming back to choice, which is what we started with. But to answer your question, that information space is very mysterious to me. It's holistic, meaning that all of the physical universe is present in every single frequency of that domain. So not just all of Earth or all of the solar system, but all of the universe. And just mathematically, that has to be true. So I don't know how to interpret that fully, but.
Right. In fact, Sky and I were talking about something that I just discovered a couple days ago, and it was talking about Andara crystals. But what I thought was fascinating was how they were formed. And if you take that to our physical lives and beyond our physical lives and beyond space and time, actually, and kind of like you said, that frequency domain, the thought about what's called the hyperfield, so which is created by 2 dimensions touching. So a hyperfield forms a no time zone where linear laws of thermodynamics are warped, or in some cases do not apply at all. So I think that's another kind of, mysterious
exploration.
Yeah, exploration, to find out what lies within. Because I've had kind of visions where I am with somebody that feels so familiar to me, and I'm seeing us in that realm and in that hyperfield beyond space and time. And there's color, there's sound, there's a frequency that allows us to communicate in a telepathic way even. And it is magical. And there's this merging of souls and beyond. It's wild.
So let me talk about timelessness. In the model that I'm talking about, when we transform a signal, you know, if you're a geek, you can just think about signals if you want. You know, time signals for music, or space signals. A photograph is a signal. The thing you're looking at on the screen is a signal. It's actually being Fourier transformed right now because the data coming into your camera is way too massive. So it's Fourier transformed. It's compressed by cutting off some of the frequencies, and then un-Fourier transformed to go back to a picture with less resolution. That's all we're talking about here. But in that Fourier transform space, or the frequency, what I call the pattern space, where the patterns are what are more important than the actual positions of things, you have essentially spacelessness and timelessness. This space doesn't exist in the same sense. It's not meaningful in the same sense. And this intrigues me a lot because we are all present throughout that frequency domain. I mean, this is a proposal I'm making, right? This is not well accepted, but I'm suggesting that you got to take this seriously. We can be transformed. You can do the mathematical transform of our space and time bodies and represent it in this other space. And in this other space, you and I are not sitting apart from each other.
Right.
You know, we're not miles apart. We're not, you know, a separate screen and whatever. We are, those concepts don't make any sense.
Right.
So there's a way in which it does. When I have a timeless moment of consciousness, when I'm, you know, like just a really tangible example is I remember going to a concert, like a homegrown concert of people playing, and I was one of the performers, but there was like 20 other performers. And in the last set, I got up there and I played with the person that was playing, and we collaborated, and it was just this synergistic, wonderful, heart-opening experience.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was at my peak in that moment, just being fully myself. So driving home after that, I felt this timelessness, this spacelessness, like this is the now, because all my worries about the future or all my conceptions about who I'm supposed to be were just gone, stripped away. And this is like one of those clearing moments that you were mentioning earlier.
Right.
Clearing out those conceptions. And so I think, I really don't know how to connect this, but that sense of timelessness or spacelessness has a certain resonance, or a certain, seems like a certain reasonableness when we're actually looking at how a hologram is also spaceless, because it contains an image throughout itself, not localized in any one place.
Right.
So that's intriguing to me, and I don't know how to answer that fully, but that's what has driven this research.
I think it's so fascinating. And I think what's so mysterious and what gets me into deeper inquiry is the fact that I almost don't know what to do with it, because I can see within that frequency realm, and it almost postpones me making decisions in this realm, because it's almost like I see the multidimensional aspects of things. And so because of that, I see all these possibilities, and I see the different links that I have to people, almost like in the now, almost like there's parallel like universes or experiences going on with them at the same time. So I'm just thinking like, okay, I could go this way, or this way, but it's just, it can complicate matters.
Well, so let me bring it back to this idea of choice. Now that we have this framework laid out there, I want to invite the idea that right now, most of us think, I don't want to say most, I'm used to a mindset where I'm thinking like life as a frame at a time. So right now I'm in this frame right here, this present moment. And I'm thinking about this present moment. Maybe I can think a few frames ahead if I want to plan for tomorrow, or plan for next week, or plan for next year. But I'm still thinking I'm in this frame here, and then I'm going to try to get to this new frame in the future. Like a film strip, but I'm one frame at a time. My research points to time being reconceptualized as a film strip, the whole strip, all at once. And this doesn't mean it's linear. It's actually a branching tree of film strips. It's just a plethora of possible film strips branching off from this moment. And as you and I talked a little bit before the show, it can even be conceived of as a spiral, or as repeating in some sense, so circular. These are all valid ways of framing it. But just for the sake of clarity, I'm just going to talk about this film strip being different from just the frame of that we're in right now. And the decisions we make are really connecting to those in a timeless sort of way that I was talking about a minute ago. this is a little bit vague, and it's going to have to stay that way because the research isn't, fully, complete, and it won't be for some
Realized.
time.
Yeah.
This takes time, but I think it can be done. We're connecting to some future experience that we want to have, and those film strips, depending on what the final frame is on each of those film strips, they'll become more or less likely along the way. And because of that likelihood, they will bring about some synchronicity on the way to bring us to that endpoint. So we can make decisions. We tend to make decisions from a very small box a lot of the time. I have a wonderful friend, Barbara Leger, who does wonderful work with communities. And she has a Russian phrase that she showed me just yesterday, Ochin malinki uyitni karubka.
Nice.
A very small, cozy box. And that's where we live a lot of the time. And so I wouldn't say everything's possible or infinite possibilities. I'd say from here, let's expand our small, cozy box to be thinking about not just what feels good in this moment, but where do I want to be? What experience do I want to have in the future? And what choices am I going to make right now that are going to directly build momentum for that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely in line with the advice to live in the moment, to live in the present, which I guess if you know Byron Katie's work at all and some of her 4 questions, to me, that takes off the pressure. And, and what would I be without that thought? Right. It puts you right back into, okay.
Yeah.
I don't, the past no longer exists. The future is not even created yet. So I'm in the moment.
Right.
So.
Right. And that's really important that you pick that up, because it would be easy for someone to say, well, that's really not in the moment, right? Because you're trying to connect to the future state or something like that. But there's a paradox here where being fully present in the moment with what we're experiencing allows us to get into an experience of flow. So a lot of times our feelings, we might have a grief experience or a disappointment in our lives. And if we're not paying close attention in the present, we're going to try and push that feeling down, try and, resist. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to accept that might be true, that this person left me, or that, this unwell experience, this disease is happening, or that I missed this opportunity. Like, I don't want to feel what might be authentically true for me in that moment. But the more that we can, when we do that, we actually block experiences that might lead us to healing.
So true.
We don't see the next opportunity to reach beyond ourselves.
So
true. There's a way in which getting present and being willing to feel either our grief, or it can be laughter, or some other experience that needs to happen, whatever needs to happen in that moment, can get us back to the present and clear away our conceptions so that we can say, what needs to happen is this.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a beautiful book. I'm in the middle of it, but it's called Emotional Intimacy. And it's really about being intimate with your own emotions so that you can truly feel. And oftentimes, as I've talked about this in other interviews as well, those times of grief, even like you talked about, or challenges, can be our portals of power, because it's those times we're really on the threshold of the breakthrough, so that we can get to the next chapter of our spiritual enlargement, transformation.
Yeah.
And so, sitting with those uncomfortable feelings,
right,
those things are so precious. Those times are so precious if we allow ourselves to actually go there.
Right. And I have a deep abiding faith in that process now. I think of it like a cycle. So we're getting back to this spiral version of time, where synchronicity acts in cycles, and it brings us repeats of the same experience over and over again.
So true.
So something will happen that triggers a feeling of pain, some buried pain inside of ourselves, a pattern or a feeling that we just don't want to feel. And then we'll react to it. Maybe someone criticizes us, and so we react in a defensive way. We might not even realize we're being defensive. Like, that's how buried we get by our patterned responses. But we say whatever we say. We notice the interaction gets worse. I had an experience recently where I tried to debate somebody about some of the political issues going on right now. And I trust this and respect this person a lot. So I tried to debate them. And I realized as we kept debating and I kept bringing what I thought was the best version of myself, we got further and further entrenched in not communicating. So noticing, being willing to acknowledge, there's some pattern here in me that I'm not seeing. There's something I'm doing that is not capturing the essence of what's really happening here. And I'm going to keep getting synchronicities. I'm going to keep having situations come up which challenge myself to be in the situation again until I understand the pattern and can learn and shift.
It's so true. I sometimes I just laugh at myself and think, when am I going to graduate from this lesson?
Yeah.
You know, and I actually had this kind of this symbolic picture come through my third eye, and it was like this cone, and it was like cylindrical, and kind of exactly what you said. It was almost like these experiences in life tend to just rotate very similar in how they are. However, each time, if we've been able to do the work, the inner work inside, and we've been able to clear things and our perspective shifts, we respond a little bit differently. And so it's like, okay, how are you going to respond this time? Okay, what about this time? Okay, what about 5 years later? What about 10 years later? And so it's like, once we get to the top of the cone where we're almost to the breakthrough, we should be almost ready to graduate. At least we should hope, right? It also reminds me of a story I heard once where I want to say it was like the Dalai Lama or something. Maybe it was the Buddha or something. And this could be total hearsay, but he was in a crowd, and one of his bodyguards, was with him. And apparently this guy in the crowd like spit in his face. And the bodyguard, went over to like get angry at this person in the crowd. So like, how dare you? And the Buddha was like, no, it's okay. And he goes over to the guy and he's like, thank you so much, because now I know I don't have anger inside of me anymore. So it's like, wow, when we know there's situations that long ago we would have reacted in a certain way, but then fast forward and we're at a point in our spiritual growth where it doesn't even faze us anymore.
Well, that's such a beautiful story.
Isn't that amazing?
If it's in there, it's part of us.
Right.
And there's a way in which if we don't feel that anymore, when the same stimulus happens, we know that we've moved to a different stage of our own, evolution, you could say, I guess.
Absolutely.
So this brings us to a topic that I think is really important, which is belief. And I talked about how when we make choices, we're taking action that connects to, certain experiences in the future. If I am defensive and argumentative or attached to my opinion of what we should do with my wife or my daughter, then over time I'm going to build a pattern, and I'm going to find myself maybe experiencing a disconnect with them, or I might actually experience situations where, and this happened to me plenty of times, where I'm attached to my movie that I want to watch, and I end up really not liking the movie and realizing the other movie that they suggested was actually great. Or I go with their suggestion, even though it's really hard for me to let go of my attachment, and I find out that's the perfect movie for me to watch. So it's a simple example of how when we let go of our attachment, and what I believe there is that the movie I had in mind is going to be better, right?
Right.
So there's a really simple version of belief in our life. And my belief is that this is what's going to make me happy, or going to work for everybody. And I find that my belief doesn't work out. And somebody else's belief, which comes to me in the form of flow. Right? Flow is this input of information. Somebody else says, let's watch this movie. And I say, well, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. But I'm going to align myself with the information and think to myself, I have a process called the Lorax: listen, open my mind, reflect on it for a little bit, release my attachment, and then act. So that gets me in the position to act a little differently, make a different choice. And then X is to repeat the process and not give up.
I like that.
So belief, I would like to spend a little time talking about how belief, gets reinforced by our choices through synchronicity.
Oh,
Synchronicity is a
yes.
process by which life brings us meaningful circumstances, but those meaningful circumstances reflect the choices we make. So if we
Can you
make
wrap
choices,
your head around that, everybody?
yeah, if we're making choices and then the cosmos is bringing us circumstances which reflect those choices, we're going to get more ingrained into what we believe the universe to be. And we're going to lose sight of a broader canvas of what is possible. We're actually going to create a world that does behave that way.
So true.
If we believe that people don't change, if we believe that people are selfish, through this process, we're going to act that way, and we're going to bring about situations that reinforce that belief, and it's going to become that.
Here's an example of how I learned that, actually, in a very physical way. So I was with a group, and the facilitator handed out postcards with pictures on them. And my postcard had a man and a woman arm in arm walking down a street, and it was a cityscape. So she asked everybody in the circle, what is on your postcard? And everybody would say, and she came to me and she said, okay, Jodi, what's on your postcard? And I said, oh, a man and a woman in love in New York City. And she goes, try again. And I was like, what am I not getting? I mean, isn't that, so talk about like a lesson in perception and beliefs. So I went again, and then finally it dawned on me. It was like this aha moment, this light bulb went on. I'm like, whoa, talk about perception. And so I was like, okay, take out the filters.
Right.
Woman, man, arm in arm, walking down a street in a city. There you go. She's like, yeah, there you go. She's like, because you were making a judgment call. Number one, that they were in love, that they were a couple, that they were in New York City. Like, how did you even know that? No, that was your perception. And so to your point, Sky, it's like we often infuse our beliefs and our perceptions into life. Therefore, what does it do? Circle back and give us those things. And then also, we tend to look for evidence for whatever our beliefs are, and we'll find it. and that then skews everything as well.
So there's two pieces here. There's what I think is called apophenia, where we filter selectively for the information we want, and we filter out the information we don't want. And that's definitely happening. It happens to all of us, happens to me. And it's happening in our media world right now. Even the media does it themselves. The editors will filter out information that doesn't make sense to them and includes information that does, that feels relevant. So there's that. And then there's also what I'm suggesting is a phenomenon that isn't yet really part of the physics lexicon, which is what I call meaningful history selection, where we're selecting the most meaningful histories from this tree of possibilities and making them more likely. So not only are we filtering from all what's there, but we're also filtering from all the possibilities of what could be there. And those are different things, but they both affect the way our beliefs get reinforced through our experiences.
Wow. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
And so this comes to really the center of my second book called Leap to Wholeness.
Yes, which is coming out spring of 2021, which I'm so excited about. And one of the people that I interviewed on Guided, Jeff Thompson, wrote the foreword. I'm so ecstatic about that.
So Jodi, you put us together. I'm so grateful for that.
Another synchronicity, right?
Right. Well, I watched his interview on your show, and he started talking about his waking up experiences. And it's somebody that I knew was on a path like mine, because he spoke in this way about it that was so humble. And I hadn't heard many people talk about it this way, that when he woke up, and this wasn't just one experience, this is like multiple times in his life, waking up to some deeper pattern in himself. Waking up is not a glamorous thing. Waking up is realizing, oh, that was my fault that happened. Oh, I see my role in the situation. Oh, I see how I'm making this dynamic worse, because I can see myself, right? I'm awake to myself. And when he had these experiences, his instinct was to go back to people in his life. He couldn't help himself. He just had to pick up the phone and call them and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I acted that way, because I get it now. I get that I was making your life miserable. I felt like I was totally right, but I made your life miserable, and I'm so sorry. And that struck me so deeply, because that's my experience too. Those are the moments when I know that I've actually progressed and graduated to some new level, because I feel how stupid I've been or how blind I've been. And I can see that I have a different perspective now.
So beautiful. I've had those moments too, so many times, so many, but what a beautiful aha to know that we've come so far to that pinnacle where we're like, oh my gosh, we've realized that.
It's totally blissful. I mean, the most blissful moments I've had are when I feel completely at fault for my past, my choices. It's like, it's the freedom of like, oh yeah, I get it. That was my fault. I can breathe deeply now. I don't have to blame the world for my situation anymore.
Right.
I can let go of the resentment that I have for this person.
Right. And then shift to something way more peaceful and happier.
Yes.
That's
and he spoke so deeply to that, I just knew I had to reach out to him and ask him to write the foreword.
Oh, I am so happy. Really. I mean, two beautiful souls coming together, and to know that it's coming out with your new book, that makes me really excited.
And he's an author. He's a great author too. You should read his books. He's got a lot of deep wisdom, especially for men like myself, reading. I think he brought a really wonderful energy, because my book, I think of it like the feminine side of the flow experience. A lot of people work on the masculine side, that are the aggressive, like let's conquer everything and get in our optimal zone. And I look at, how do I touch into what's holding me back? What is the emotional experience that I'm having that I can't see, that I'm blind to, that I can start to release and feel that grief so that I can move forward without it. And what Jeff brings is this martial arts stance of like, holding ourselves erect and full in the world at the same time that we're being vulnerable.
I love it. What a perfect marriage for the divine masculine and divine feminine to come together. Yeah. I mean, as he, writes the foreword, and for people who don't know, you can look on Guided, and he wrote The Divine CEO. And so I interviewed him, and he is writing the foreword for Sky's new book coming out the spring of 2021. And so right now, just quickly to touch upon the fact that, our world is so polarized right now, and to bring the energies of the feminine and masculine together is just, it's not only part of my mission, but Sky also sees that, the divine feminine is also needed to be rebalanced within every individual, the divine feminine, divine masculine. So I think that's beautiful. Tell us about this new book. I'm excited.
Well, yes. And then let's come back to the divine feminine and masculine in the discussion of the difficulty we're having in the world, or in specifically in my part of the world right now. Let's come back to that.
Which is California, for those who don't know. Yeah.
California and the United States. And
yes.
So the book is called Leap to Wholeness: How the World is Programmed to Help Us Heal, Grow, and Adapt. And those words are important. I chose programmed because I want to emphasize that this seems to be a process by which we are more likely to experience situations that will help us grow than other experiences. So then we can start to trust that whatever we're experiencing is actually helpful for our growth. If our goal is to heal, grow, and adapt, which I think it should be, then we can start to trust that this world is programmed to bring us those experiences. So how do I settle in and kick back and take it, learn from it, and stop complaining about it?
Right.
And so we come back to this idea of filters. And I return to holograms, which I studied when I was 20, and try and understand them at a deeper level and say, a hologram is really a filter. The way you make a hologram is you take a piece of blank film, photographic film, and you shine laser light, like single frequency light, onto an object, and you bounce that light onto the film. Now, if you had a lens there, it would be a camera. You'd focus the image onto the film, but you take away the lens, And essentially with a few other tricks, you have the raw waveform. You just
Right.
capture the
Okay.
waveform as it really exists in space.
Okay.
And there's another ray that's also hitting it to give you sort of a reference point, and together those give you a waveform, which is really a filter. So now I take the object away and I shine the same type of light through it, and it bends the light in exactly the same way that the filter wants it to create a picture as if the object was there.
Uh-huh.
So you're just filtering
I
out
see.
the light that you don't want, and bending it in the right way so that you get the original pattern. It's a way in which we can repeat patterns by by filtering the original light. So through the course of the book, I connect this as the hologram is a metaphor, but in actually it is mathematically. I also in my work show that quantum mechanics is equivalent to the mathematics of holograms. And this is the work I'm trying to publish right now. So it hasn't been demonstrated in the mainstream yet, but I hope to be there in the next few years. So it's both a metaphor for how we filter out our own wholeness. We take whatever is, the core of who we are, our soul expression, and we filter it through layers of conditioning.
Right.
Things that we think are okay, programming, ways that we think we shouldn't speak up right now because someone's going to get mad at me, or I might offend somebody, or, thinking that I shouldn't take a risk because I'll probably have this bad thing happen. And that's based on my previous experiences. So there's this great metaphor for how we take our own wholeness, which we all have. It's very intimate. We can just check in with who we were when we were a young kid, and that's our whole self. But it starts to get filtered through these constraining impulses that we have over time.
So true. And back to what your Russian friend said, we tend to stay in that little comfy box, you know?
Очень маленький, уютный коробка.
Yes, I love it.
Cozy little, very small, cozy box.
Yes, very small, cozy little. I love it. So yeah, we tend to stay there, and then those are the filters we utilize, and it doesn't give us those expansive possibilities. So how do we switch from that?
Right. So it's actually, it's our life work, right? I don't want to minimize it, but we already talked about it. The way that we move out of our filters is through experiences of awe and wonder. Those actually just came back into my head now, because the other things I was going to say are grief and laughter.
Oh, I love that though, that you did both sides of the spectrum, because it's true. Both sides activate us, the positive and the negative. Yeah.
And they get us out of our mental analytical space of I'm right and you're wrong. They get us into connection. And it's only in grief or in laughter or in awe and wonder that we can hold diametrically opposed truths. And this is actually what Niels Bohr called complementarity in the physics realm. Complementarity is two truths that are mutually exclusive of each other, and yet can both be held in a single framework. Wow.
In fact, the exercise I was telling you about with the postcards, it was facilitated by a woman who was, her expertise was in dialectical behavior therapy. So similar, where you have two dialectical, opposites, but then you have the spectrum in between of all these different, things that could happen. But we tend to be polarized on either, like absolutes, but what you're talking about is where if we can be on I wouldn't say opposing, that's the wrong word, but the very positive end of the spectrum, or the grief end of the spectrum that activates, that beautiful growth activation, then that can really shift us.
Right. So one of the things that's been deeply touching to me is watching social justice issues happen in our country, and watching the greater awareness that people like me, a white male, have of the struggle that Black people and people of color have in our culture, and have had for since the beginning of our country and longer. It just strikes me now, and I might be speaking outside of my realm of knowledge, but it strikes me now that when someone has a great loss, you know, and someone is unjustly killed in their family, the person who from that family who is interviewed on the news isn't calling for vengeance. They're so deeply wounded from their grief that they're completely split open. And they're in that place of connection. They're in that place of nothing you do can make this better for me. My heart is split open. I have got a big open hole inside of me, and no one's ever going to fix it. So I'm so moved when I see them interviewed, because my heart is so grieving for their loss. And that is the power of grief. It's also the power of laughter or awe. It opens us beyond our mental desire to find a fault or a blame. Now, it's important that we do the work to bring about social justice. Social justice involves real change, real action. But the more we can do it from the place that those people are coming from, the less reaction life will send us to that undermines our own efforts to begin with. The more we can bring that complete defenseless openness. That's what Martin Luther King brought, and that's what many other people have brought as leaders. Like,
the approach or the from the heart space of being broken open, because then you're also almost in this beautiful, vulnerable state of just presence in the moment, of also being able to receive as well.
Yeah, you're receiving, and you're not going to react to the stupid things that other people do to incite your, ire. So instead of getting caught up in the meaningless details, you're going to stay focused on what needs to change. And we're moved by people when they open themselves so fully that there's nothing we can attack.
Yeah.
And that is the deepest form, I think, of transformation. And that kind of presence is the presence that will transform our country and our world right now. Because the rest of the people are getting caught up in their beliefs, why this is unjust, why this is right, why this is wrong. And when we do that, we get caught up, we believe our beliefs. And that's the real challenge. Is it possible to have beliefs, but not actually believe them?
That is a beautiful question, actually. That goes really deep. It's almost like from the standpoint of the observer, rather than getting entrenched in polarization and in just this opinionated amalgamation of just, polarization, So I think that's so important to just kind of take a step back and let's challenge our own beliefs. We don't have to believe our own beliefs, but let's stay into that heart space of wonder and either clearing the grief so we can get into that laughter and bliss, but just the state of, like you said, being able to receive, to be able to open up and just be at that new state of, it's almost like a blank slate in a way.
We become a blank slate, right? We become receptive to each person's experience, each person's real experience, not their anger, not their blame, but what's really going on underneath. And I think so far in this conversation, I've focused on one community that I think is, social justice, like I said, is absolutely work that requires effort, and we can do better. On the other side of that argument are people that, I don't want to say people. We need more heartfeltness, right? More people really on both sides, coming from a place of non-blaming, touching into their deeper wounds. Everybody has deep wounds.
Yes.
And if we're not willing to honor those or understand them, take the time to look inside and see why we're being reactive right now, we're just going to perpetuate those wounds. Because through this process of meaningful history selection, or however else you want to frame it psychologically, you're going to take actions which actually have maybe the opposite effect from what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of creating
So
peace, you're
true.
going to create more anger, more frustration, more violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a scripture that I grew up with, and it talks about like either you're going to choose on your own to be humble, or you're going to be compelled to be
Mm-hmm.
humble.
Right.
And basically, what that means is like if you don't choose to do the work yourself and clear things and purify yourself so you're a blank slate and you can receive, so you can see, like you said, everybody else's perspective, and in a heart space of love, then there's going to either be things dealing with social justice and polarization, or natural disasters are going to come along, you know,
Right.
and compel you to be at a place where you're going to be split open. You
Right.
know, I mean,
Right.
from the fires in California to, I mean, gosh, we had hurricanes in Louisiana and tornadoes, and there's all sorts of things. And at that point, though, my observation is when those things happen, yes, people are compelled to be humble, because then they pull together
Right.
and they start helping each other, and they
Yeah.
look inside and they go, what is really important?
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to climate change because I think you brought that in beautifully, and the potentially unifying power of climate change. Before I do, I want to come back to what I'm really trying to say is about social justice, is that social justice is my work as a white male, because I need to be able to recognize my own grief at losing privilege. Change involves people like me losing privilege and coming to terms with the privilege I have. And that involves some grief. And so it's important for people in my position, a white male or whatever your position is, that you have some privilege to do that work of grief, because that we're the ones that need to do that work to honor our own pain of letting go of what we've been given so far that we might need to let go of in order to have more peace and justice in the world.
I just got chills because what that says to my heart is your soul is so able to look inside and do that self-inquiry, to clear things with yourself, that what that does is it changes the external so that the power structures actually start crumbling. So when we do the inner work,
Mm-hmm.
and we shift our paradigms and we shift internally, we see the results, and we see everything change externally. And
Yeah.
that's really, if more people on a massive level can start doing that, there's going to be a tipping point, and we're going to start seeing all those things crumble, all the power structures start crumbling, and we are going to have a new world. There is a possibility out there that we can choose, a probability, in that hologram that Sky is talking about, that's out there. So,
Well, let me give you the framework that I think can work. And this is
yes,
in the metaphor of parenting.
please.
So I woke up maybe a week ago, and it might have been the day that I woke up and it was black outside. It was dark all
Oh,
day.
yeah. Yeah.
The sun never rose. I think it was Wednesday. The sun never rose where I am.
Wow.
It was the first time I've ever had that in my entire life. It was
That's
black. I turned out the
wild.
lights in the middle of the day. It was black because of the fires halfway across the state.
Mm-hmm.
And that day I was upstairs having breakfast, and my daughter came in to get ready for school. And you can imagine I was very tight in my chest because I felt responsible for the problems that we're facing. I felt embarrassed to my daughter that I've let my world become like this, the one that I'm giving to her. I felt scared because I don't know how to solve this, and I don't know what the world is going to be like for her in the future, or for me, or for anybody. All these things, all this stress. And I had a choice. What would naturally happen is I would be cranky and frustrated or negative. And that would be like in our world, being confrontational, being righteous, being believing that we know the right person to vote for, or who's on the right side of the social justice issue, or all those things that we think we're right about. And the other option is at one point I realized, well, I'm going through something inside myself that's hurt, that's painful. But what I want to do is feel it. And I started to cry sitting at the kitchen table. And I just started having whatever feelings were coming up. It was tears. And my daughter heard it from the other room and said, "Are you okay?" And she came in and she sat on my lap. And that's what I call the clearing experience, because my physical body changed. I let go of that tension through that process of expressing my tears. I changed my experience, and my whole view, my whole perception changed. And I was completely present with my daughter. There was no negative residual experience with her or for her. And she got an experience of me being open and vulnerable. And then I felt capable of addressing the part, what am I going to do next with my day? And so that's the shift that we can make when we feel the pain that we're feeling personally, and recognize that when I'm angry at the television and the people on the television, I'm having an internal experience of pain.
Right. Yeah.
That's my experience of pain. I'm angry at that person. I feel righteous. And we have the capacity to transform that through grief, through recognizing what we're afraid of and feeling that fear. And these are some of the practices that I teach in my work. How do we recognize what we're feeling and actually allow it to be there and feel it in our body, the sensation, so that we can move through it and get back to a centered point of, okay, so what am I here to do right now in this world?
Yeah. What a beautiful experience. Thank you for sharing that, because not only is crying releasing, but it's cleansing so much. And not only in that experience were you doing something helpful for yourself, but you were giving your daughter permission to show her feelings and be vulnerable. And then also in the future for that to be perpetuated in her life.
Right.
So you were not only helping yourself, but her and future generations. And also that helps clear familial lineage and things in your own DNA that, goes backward and forward.
Right. Right.
So how beautiful.
And I think the most important thing to point out here that I want to make sure is mentioned is it gets rid of judgment.
Oh yeah.
How do we get rid of the judgment that we have of other people or of people that we don't even know that are changing we're frustrated with the way they're behaving in politics or whatever. That experience cleanses that judgment so that we can actually relate at a human level. And that's how we can start to make progress.
So true.
In my view.
So true. I agree. I love what we're diving into. It's so beautiful. I'm looking at kind of the list we made before the show as well. And we've talked about grief. We've talked about ways to clear it. We've talked about social justice. Did you want to touch more upon the climate change because of the fires and everything like that? I know my family lives in California as well, and they've sent me pictures of just the horrendous visibility because of all of it, and they've even contemplated relocating altogether, because they just feel like we don't know if it's going to get worse, and all this PG&E stuff going on, just like last summer. I actually was in the North Bay with Fox News and Fox Business covering the fires at the vineyards, at the
2017.
2017. Yeah. So it breaks my heart that it's just like this perpetuation of stuff. But at the same time, today I was looking at it from a different standpoint as well. Symbolically, just like the tarot card, the Tower, when everything crumbles, there has to be a new beginning, a rebirth, a resurrection. And really with fire, it is cleansing. Everything is just kind of mowed down, because in the spring, things will grow and hopefully rebuild. So I know this is absolutely horrific and so much loss and so much grief, but there can be a rebuilding. And I think that is your feeling with climate change too, that we can make a difference.
Absolutely. I feel so hopeful that this is an exterior enemy, or actually an interior enemy. It's our own. Climate change is really easy to solve. You plant trees, you till the soil, you plant plants in the ground, you grow food. It totally will solve it. But what's hard to solve is humans getting along with each other. And that's why I do this work on our filters, and how it's so hard for us to have a conversation in which we don't, argue about some point or another. So what's happening in my part of the state, in 2017, my family made the decision to move closer into the city from a more rural area. And that was inspired by many things, but including some dreams and synchronicities, which led me to feel like it was time to really pursue what I'm doing now more and be more urban. 3 months after we left, the massive, devastating fire that occurred up in Sonoma County happened.
Yeah.
And came within a block of my old house.
Oh, wow.
And it devastated the neighborhood. So that was the first fire of the many fires that have happened since. And every year, 2017, 2018, 2019, and this year, there's been tremendous, devastating fires in California. And I want people to know that I remember in 1995, there was a fire out in Point Reyes where I grew up. And then I think there was one more that I'm not thinking of since then. Over 25 years, that's 2 fires. But between 1995 and 2015, 2 fires. Since 2017, there's been hundreds of fires. Well, at least 2 or 3 major fires every year. And right now in California, 4 of the top 10 fires in California history are burning.
Oh my goodness.
Right to this year, in 1 year, 4 of the top 10. So
in California or
in California.
across? Okay. In California. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter to me what the evidence is from scientists or what the, what collusion there's going on to, people to make money off of solving climate change. Yeah, I get that stuff's happening. I get that there are people trying to pivot themselves to benefit from climate change and to, invest in solar, but they happen to be themselves invested in solar. Whatever.
Right.
I get that. Like that happens, and that's what humans have been doing for a long time.
Sure.
But I know from my experience that this wasn't happening 4 years ago, this fire situation. And it's directly affecting me. I can't go outside. I haven't been outside in 3 days, literally.
Oh my gosh.
And it wasn't happening for the first 42 years of my living here. So that is just a change that's happened. And the only common factor is that the temperature in the air is slightly, in the climate is slightly greater. There's slightly less rain. And these small things can change the tipping point, or, small changes affect big systems in really profound ways. Yeah. And so I don't care what the debate is. I just know in my personal, I'm experiencing grief. My family and my community is experiencing grief, a tremendous traumatic grief around what are we going to do with our lives? Can we continue to live in this place we've lived in our whole lives? And it's not a debate. So the question then to me becomes, okay, so let's let go of the debate around whether it's human cause or not. Of course it is human cause. I can look out my window and see the freeway. There's, cars day and night on the freeway every day. And that's one of hundreds of thousands of freeways in the world spewing out carbon. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's happening. Like we know that that's going to have an impact. So let's stop. So I'm done with my rant. As a scientist, I just expect things to have an impact when we look at them. It's going to have an impact. So right. I think this can bring us together, and we do have to make sure that people aren't profiting off other people's misery. We need to do it in a way, and there's a lot of complicated politics, but to say that this is a hoax is directly counter to my personal experience. And there's no way that you and I could have an argument where you would convince me that anything other than my experience is that there's been 4 years of devastating wildfires in my city that have not happened before. So let's get to some common ground, and let's start looking at how we can come together. And I understand, I'll say one more thing about this. I understand, and this is using my own methods to ease this tension. I understand that for some people, this issue is tied up with other issues like the imposition of governmental regulations and the threat of the government taking control of our lives in ways that are unacceptable. So we have to honor that. And I think this is a thing that Democrats do a really terrible thing doing, is honoring the perspective of conservatives or Republicans. Liberals don't do a good job of honoring the perspective of conservatives, and conservatives don't do a great job of honoring the perspective of liberals. So that's where our work is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's like we talked about before, it's the polarization, but where can we come together so that we can actually work together and be balanced?
And so I need to grieve my loss my community, my ecosystem. And somebody who's concerned about government taking over needs to grieve that.
Yes.
Rather than going out and saying, I'm really mad and I'm going to fight you at every step, grieve it, that this is a fear that you have, and enter into that dialogue from a place of open-hearted grief.
Right. Right.
We all need to do that.
And not only that, to your point, let's take this issue back inside.
Right.
Okay. Because symbolically, climate change, it goes with the cycles, it goes with the seasons, it goes with really doing self-care. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing the self-care necessary, there's going to be all sorts of things going haywire within your body, within your climate,
right.
You know, so to speak. From your energy body to your pain body to your auric field to your chakras to all
right.
sorts of things. The climate is not going to be balanced within your body
right.
if you don't take care of your inner landscape. Yeah. So symbolically, climate change to our inner landscape has so much, you know, to do with actually what we can do.
Yeah. So, and that's actually my first approach most of the time is, you know, climate change is symbolic.
Yeah.
You know, the oceans are rising, and the oceans in Jungian psychology represent the subconscious.
So true.
We see the subconscious rising, you know, it's threatening us to engulf us.
Right.
Our subconscious biases and, you know, racism and whatever it may be. So it is symbolic. And I think that's where I've never doubted that climate change was really happening, because it makes sense symbolically that that's what would happen when we're out of balance.
Yeah.
As people.
Yep.
The climate externally and internally is out of balance. So I think it's on all of us to say, okay, we don't have to agree on every detail, but let's agree that the world outside is reflecting what's going on in myself. And I have to accept that in myself, there's turmoil. Mm-hmm. There's storms. There's massive storms.
Yes. I know. Seriously, every time something happens on the external or there's a headline, then I'm like, what is that? And what is going on? Then I immediately try to turn to self-inquiry. I'm like, okay, what is going on? What is going on with my thought process? What is going on physically, mentally, spiritually, energetically? Yeah. Because there is something. Yeah. Yeah. So I think if the masses could take on that practice, we would see massive changes in the world. Yeah. Just massive changes. So I think your books and your music are just so relevant for our day. Absolutely. And I mean, I don't know if we've talked about everything you've wanted to, but I do want to touch upon relationships. And the really unique way that you met your wife. I think it's just fascinating. Because, you know, speaking of synchronicities and the way that we make decisions on where to go, where to be, all of that stuff makes a difference in who we meet and our life path and all of that. So Sky, kind of tell us about how that all went down.
Well, I know my wife since high school. And then some years later, we were in college and we were both traveling around Europe. And before we left for Europe, we decided to try and meet up. And this is in the 90s. So there wasn't really the same kind of connectivity that you have now. Just keep that in mind. Okay?
You're not like texting at that point, like, hey, meet me here.
Right, exactly. So she was studying in Israel and I was backpacking around Europe. And I was staying in hostels, you know, living really cheap. And at one point I called her on a phone from a hostel and we chatted for a few minutes. And then I looked down and the bill, it was clear. It was like 30 euros.
Oh, wow.
And I freaked out. I was like, I can't afford that. This is my budget for a week of food, you know? So I said, I'll call you when I get closer. Bye. And I hung up. So we didn't have a plan. And I just figured, okay, our plan was vaguely to meet in Greece. That was romantic, right?
I can't wait to go there.
Okay. So we weren't even actually in a committed relationship of any kind. We had been friends for a long time. And so, but we had this sense that it would be really lovely to meet in Greece. That would be, I don't know if romantic is the right word because of that, but it would be fantastical, you know? So I'm traveling through Italy, and I figure I'll call her when I get to the bottom of Italy, and I'm on my way to Greece. And actually in Rome, I realized that I was sick.
Oh no.
And I couldn't continue traveling, and I had to go home. So my flight was out of Paris. I already had a ticket for like a month away, but I just rebooked my flight to be, this weekend, and I got on a train and went to Paris. So meanwhile, she's waiting for me to call, and she's, getting frustrated, not hearing from me. And she can't, she misses my call. She's not going to be able to like call me back.
Right.
So, she's just not sure it's ever going to happen. She's telling all her friends that there's this guy, Sky, that's going to call, and we're going to meet in Greece. And and they stop.
They're like, oh, you mean your imaginary boyfriend?
Right. Exactly. I don't think that was, too far from their minds. And finally, one day her friends invite her to go to Paris for the weekend because there's Fashion Week. And it's, it's like a couple hours flight from Israel. It's not that far. And at first she said, no, I got to wait for Sky to call. If I'm gone for the weekend and I miss his call, I'll never meet him. But she got on the phone with her mom that night in California, and her mom convinced her to go to Paris. Forget about me.
Forget about Sky. I'm going to Fashion Week.
Exactly, which is a good thing. So she says yes. She gets on the plane and goes to Paris. And I had about 48 hours before my flight. So I want to spend my time in Paris. Well, I go to the Louvre Museum, which is the biggest museum there.
I love the Louvre.
It's beautiful.
Yep.
And I'm walking around the Louvre looking, I think, for the Mona Lisa at this point. And I walk in this room and I just stop in my tracks because there's this person that looks just like Dana. But there's no part of my mind that thinks that it's her because she's in Israel. And that's just impossible. So I'm not even thinking it's impossible. I'm just thinking this person looks a lot like Dana, but so much so that I'm like staring at her. And I looked a little funky because I've been traveling for, 6 weeks with a jacket and the dirt. And so I hadn't shaved, and her friend looks over at me and then says to her, don't look now, but there's this really weird guy staring at you. And so she turns and she says, that's Sky.
Oh my God. Wait, he's not imaginary. He's real.
Yeah.
And he's here at the Louvre.
Her friend was like, oh my God, this is the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. So we spent those next 12 hours together. She came to the airport with me, and we spent the night talking at the airport. And I think I went to sleep and she basically stood guard. I mean, it was very sweet. And it turns out she brought letters with her that she'd written me, but didn't have a post office to send them to. And to this day, neither of us really remembers why she brought them to Paris with her.
Wow.
But she had them with her, and she gave them to me, and I read them on the way home. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So this is an amazing experience, once in a lifetime. And I've actually calculated under the most generous conditions, the likelihood of this happening, and shown that it's, less than 5% under the best conditions. And 5% is, my theoretical cutoff for why, we need a better solution. We need a better explanation. The current explanation of randomness just doesn't cut it.
Right.
And some years later, we really got serious about our relationship, and that was a key turning point, and we got married.
Amazing.
So she's my wife, and we have a family now.
I love that story. I think that's like you said, once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's so neat. So now let's go back and bring it to the synchronicities and, your expertise in the field and all of that. So, I mean, what is your feeling about the fact that, okay, well, you were meant to meet her, or what if she had made a different decision, or you were going to make a different decision? Do you think that you guys would have wound up circling back or orbiting each other's lives again? Or do you think, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think there's different ways of looking at the synchronicities. One is, we had intended to meet in Greece, and we took actions to back up that intention. We made some plans. I tried to call her from Spain, different things that she made an intention to be available by the phone. She was investing herself, and things got shifted in those branching trees. They got moved around. We went to a different branch than we thought, but we ended up meeting because those branches had other ways of unfolding that could be successful. So I think of it like apples on a tree. There's lots of apples. And our initial intention is to meet in Greece, but that's one apple. That's one form that it could take. the underlying intention is the very apple itself. And there's lots of those apples.
So yeah, let's talk about the intention behind all of it. Okay, I think if two people or more, even one person, but let's take both you and Dana. Okay, you guys both had intentions of wanting to meet each other, meet up. To me, that's powerful energy. And so even though the variables might be different on how that plays out and how that unfolds, because you both were kind of synchronized in a way to have that same intention at some point, to me, that's the likelihood and the probability of you meeting up is higher. Now, say there's two people, one has a very, very strong intention for, something certain to unfold, but the other's intention isn't so strong, then something else might totally play out. What do you think?
I'm going to bring it back to, I'm going to counter that a little bit with this idea of relationality, that really it's just one person's intention that's forming their world. And when I say intention, what I'm pointing to is what experience do I anticipate having?
Okay.
Not where do I want to meet this person, but what's the experience internally that I want? I want to experience connected. I want to experience a lifelong relationship with this person. I want to experience a deepening. So those are the things that we're actually grabbing onto in the future, I think.
Right.
And from my perspective, Dana fell into place in my world to be in the Louvre at the same moment that I was there. Now,
so you were saying that you had that in general, like I want that connectedness. I want a long-term relationship. That was just in general.
And with her. No.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. So
I see.
Specifically with her.
Okay.
But I want to encourage your listeners to separate the objectivity of the world. Like, as when you say that there's two people who both have a strong intention, I'm looking at it saying, well, this person has a strong intention and their point of view is from over here. And they're anticipating a certain set of experiences, and then their world falls into place a certain way. And then I leave that behind completely, and I go to this other person and I say, well, their perspective is this, and they have a strong intention, and it happens this way. And yes, our worlds lined up in such a way that there was this beautiful synergy, and the synchronicity served both of us. I guess it's possible that one of us would feel strongly and the other one wouldn't. The synchronicity might still happen, or would be likely to still happen, and it would serve us in different ways. For me, it would serve me in a deep way, and for you, it might not serve you that much.
I see. Or even like when a relationship has an expiration date on it or ends or something. So maybe somebody's intention was stronger, someone's not so much, or they didn't have the same outcome in mind or end result in mind. So maybe it still could have lined up for a while. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it just, it spins out of your orbit or out of your world, and there's an expiration date. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. And so in that expiration, maybe for one person, they're anticipating, meaning they're needing to experience the standing their ground and leaving the relationship so that they can move on to what they really need from some other relationship. And the other person might need to experience the holding on and not being able to let go and the grief that comes from that. Like that's actually going to serve them.
Yeah.
And so that dynamic can unfold. It seems imbalanced, but it's actually can be serving both people in the ways that they need.
Yeah. So the blueprint actually, if we, since we talked about that, the blueprint could have been, or let's back it up here. The soul contract between two people could have been such that both their blueprints aligned so that they could learn what they needed to soul-wise in their soul growth, so that meeting up was advantageous to both what they needed, even though eventually, maybe there was an expiration date. And like you just pointed out, maybe for one, it's, to hold on, and for the other, it was to leave. And both things served them in their soul growth, even though it was different. But in the overarching blueprint, their soul contract was supposed to be and meant to be. And yeah, it was advantageous.
Yeah. And I think there's two things about that are important, that are sort of flip sides of each other. One is, I think I can offer two practical steps for utilizing this work. One, be conscious about how your actions reflect your intentions or your anticipated experiences, so that you can align yourself with the future experiences that you want to have. And if you're pretty practiced and disciplined about choosing the world you want, you know, you get up and you do work on the projects that are going to bring you the dream that you want, rather than do the projects that you think other people expect of you. You know, how do you make sure that you're doing the work that you want to create in your life? That's the first step. But then the second step is to step back and say, then if I'm doing that, every single experience is serving me on that path. So instead of being attached to, you know, staying in this relationship, if I'm on this path, then I trust that when the relationship ends, I'm still going to feel heartbroken and hurt, but I'm going to have more grace around it, because I understand, I trust that there's something about this that is necessary for me to reflect on. And I'm, you know, rather than blaming the other person, I'm going to turn it back inwards and say, okay, what is it for me to take out of this?
See,
now that being said, I don't think it means that we can justify our actions that way. Well, this is good for you too. You know, I'm going to do this and it's good for both of us or something. I think that's a mistake.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I think also, and we talked about this a little earlier, but if you allow your past to inform your future in a negative way, where you're dragging your past into your future, that can also, I think, hinder you in a way where you're allowing your fears to get in the way of even moving forward in a certain direction. That can almost incapacitate you on a spiritual soul level in certain areas of your life. And I think if you could take the standpoint and the approach that you just mentioned, where you think, okay, if I keep doing things and following my bliss, even if there's an experience in there somewhere and that contains heartbreak or grief, it's okay, because it's going to serve me. It's going to help in my spiritual progression. But then there are those people who are like, oh, hell no, I don't want to go through anything like that. So here's where I'm going to stay. I'm going to play it safe, so that I don't have to go through anything like that.
Very small, cozy box.
Yeah, small, cozy box. So I'm going to be a spectator. This is going to be a spectator sport for me. You know what I mean? So what would you say to those people?
There's a great Rumi poem about the lake and the fire on the shore of the lake. And the fire represents what about the world is consuming and painful and burning and suffering, or maybe willing stuff. Well, I'll get to the willing part in a minute. And the lake is what feels soothing and comforting. And there's this trickery of nature. And this comes back to what I bring up in the book about Maya, the Hindu concept that the world is an illusion. There's this trickery that those of us who go for the lake, who go for the water, we go under the lake, we're wanting this security of comfort, and we want things to make sense in our minds, and we want to feel right about our worldview and all of that. But our heads pop out of the fire because we find ourselves burning and realize not understanding why we're suffering. And yet those who go for the fire, who choose willingly to undergo transformation, to challenge their own beliefs, to go inside themselves and criticize themselves first, and then come to a point of self-compassion, they come out of the water, because suddenly from that place of self-compassion, there's peace, there's inner peace. And there's the ability to see clearly so that we can make choices which actually move our life forward in good ways. So there's that trickery. And so I would suggest, it's been my experience, that the more I'm willing to suffer intentionally, to undergo constraint intentionally, the more I find myself in comfort, because I'm more comfortable in more situations and at peace with myself.
That is definitely something to think about, for sure. I love Rumi. Yeah. I love that stuff.
Yeah. So right now in history, you know, we have the choice. We don't have the choice so much anymore, because as you said, we're being piled on. You know, life is like this. Mother Nature is this grand martial arts teacher that's piling on the pain, you know. But I think we're ready for it. I think we can go towards the fire and say, what do I need to do to transform here?
How the refiner's fire, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. This is amazing stuff. I mean, my audience is I think this is gonna make their head spin. This is mind-blowing stuff. I just cannot wait for your book to come out.
Thank you. I'm
So,
really excited about it. It speaks very deeply to what I want to say right now,
mhm,
and the power that we have to reframe our perspective and actually transform the world through that.
absolutely. And something else, not only do you have just a brilliance in what you say, but in what you sing. And I want to take it back to your album.
Thank you.
So, Stand For Me, which was just released. So, tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that.
Well, music for me is a way to practice flow,
Mm-hmm.
practice being present in uncomfortable situations, to practice showing up in ways that's not intellectual. Because I think that there's absolutely a need to be balanced in our intellectual approach, our analytical understanding of life versus our experience of life itself, the feeling aspect, experiencing it. And I think if we don't have both, we're going to come into conflict and not be our whole selves. And my book is called The Leap to Wholeness. So it's about coming to that whole place. So for me, music expresses the other side of who I am,
Mm-hmm.
and forces me to get out of my head and be present with emotions and with people in relationship. So this album is, the title track is called Stand For Me. And it's both a personal exploration of feeling what I needed more of as a kid, my woundings from my childhood, but also looking at, well, who in our lives needs us to stand up for them? Or what does Mother Nature need us to stand up for it?
Mm.
Or do we need to stand up for the future that we want to create against the forces of people who don't want to create that, or who don't care, or haven't thought about it? What does it take to stand up for something in our lives that we care about? Because according to my view of synchronicity, if we don't stand up for the things we care about, they start to devolve and not
Mm-hmm.
and get less likely to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of songs on the album that come back to this theme of what do we fight for? What do we care about? And how do we take that on inside of ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. How much of that in spiritual evolution is associated with alchemy? Have you done some research with that?
I'm familiar with alchemy. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful, I want to say metaphor, but I think it can be more than a metaphor too. I don't want to minimize it.
Mm-hmm.
But as a metaphor for personal transformation, I'm always about taking these things like alchemy symbolically.
Mm-hmm.
Transforming lead into gold is an internal process of transforming the parts of ourselves that are reactive and
Right.
angry and resentful and blaming the external world into the part of ourselves that can be reflective and transform our own reactions, so that then, and this is what I think is the metaphor, everything we touch turns to gold.
Yes. Yep.
That's how we create gold, by being empty of our own opinions. We actually be able to synchronistically bring all the elements in our environment together to make things work. And this is why I think this practice is so useful for organizations in the modern world and people trying to accomplish things in life, because when we get into flow, we automatically start to weave the threads together in ways that we get out of the way and we masterfully help it happen.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, before I let you go, I do want to simplify something, just because I think some of these concepts are really large for my audience. I think for others of my audience, they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is amazing. This is brilliant, but there was something when we first started talking. I think it was one of your papers that you were working on, actually, or you just published last year, actually. But I had a question for you, and you kind of answered it, where you said, well, it's as if the world is almost like a blank slate, and you maybe have an intention of receiving a certain email, and then you go to your inbox and it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, the responsive world.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, what is your thought on affirmations and intentions? So like if I say, okay, I really want to be, say it's like a, I don't know, PhD program. I really want to be accepted to this particular PhD program, or I really want to, make this move, or I really want to, whatever it is that somebody wants, so that their universe can be responsive to their wishes. I mean, what would you say to people in a practical sense? But then again, we have the variable of the blueprint too.
Right. Well, let me tell you the story of how my first book got published.
Yes.
So I had this manuscript I'd had for many years, and I decided in my mind, I made the shift to like, I'm going to publish it really simply with like a self-publishing. No, I'm going to find a publisher. That was a shift that I had to make in my own self-esteem, that it's worth doing the extra work, taking the extra time. I believe it can happen, and it's worth it to me. For other people, that might be the right choice, self-publishing, absolutely. But for me, this is the first project I'd ever really felt successful at, and I wanted to make that happen. So I started researching and writing. Each of these applications is like a job application. You spend a month writing it and updating your resume, or fine crafting it, and then send it off, and then you wait for 6 weeks. So I'd gone through about 2 or 3 rejections.
Gruesome process.
It's gruesome. And it's been 6 or 9 months. And I got this synchronistic connection from someone I knew that I thought would be this sounds like a good publisher. I'm excited. That's a good match at North Atlantic Books. And I sent them a proposal, and I worked really hard on it. I crafted it and I sent it. The minute I clicked send, I was like, I'm done with that. Whew. I can move on to other stuff. And I started going back to my research and going back to other things going on in my life. And I just was very grateful not to sit down and write for a bunch of weeks. So after about 4 weeks, I started getting antsy, like I'm going to hear back from them any day. And I hadn't been writing. And I got so antsy, I was like checking my email every half an hour. And I remember sitting in the car in the dark and checking my email at a stop sign. And I just knew that they were going to get back to me. And I checked, and I knew it was going to be negative, and they rejected it. And I knew, because I felt inside that I had not been committed. I was waiting on the circumstance. I was like attaching myself to this thing I wanted. And in doing so, I made it not happen.
Interesting.
So what I learned from that experience and from other experiences is I have to stay focused on my longer goal. And I have to become a writer, meaning I have to write. I'm not waiting for this thing to happen. And if that happens, it helps me. But if I stay focused on my purpose, it will then come along to help me. It becomes an apple on the tree that helps me get to my goal.
Yeah.
So I found Oprah's website, and she had a contract there for writers with themselves. You write an hour every day. You don't get up from your seat, develop a discipline. And I started doing that. And I found a friend who wanted to have me ghostwrite a book for him. So it didn't actually end up happening, but I ended up spending the whole summer writing for him. Or writing, just writing. And 6 months later, I got a blog full of material. I've been writing every day for 6 months. And I knew that I was going to be at a conference with these same publishers. And I just initiated a conversation. And then we met the first day at the conference, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have a conversation again. And I said, I want to submit a totally new manuscript. And I started from scratch. And 6 or 8 weeks later, we had an agreement.
Wow.
So there's a real element of action. And it's not action towards a specific attached outcome. It's action towards an experience that I wanted to have, separate from the individual players in the process.
Wow. It also seems to be associated, like you said, with preparation. Your individual preparation and feeling like you were ready. And so that augmented your confidence in meeting the right people and going to the right places and attracting those experiences, that response, like a magnet.
Right. Through effort. Like I purposely didn't get angry at them when they rejected my first proposal. And I wrote them a nice email saying, honestly, I really appreciate that you all took the time to read this. Yeah. As they said, we almost liked it enough to do it, but we didn't want to do it. And that indicated to me that they really read it.
Yeah.
So I brought I put aside my resentment or frustration, and I brought the gratitude out, and And then a few months later, when I got the chance to meet them again, I sent them a nice little email saying, hey, do you want to meet up? And we built a real relationship rather than me needing something from them. And that was all part of my developing practice of being in flow or living in flow.
I love that. That is wonderful. That's amazing. So in a practical sense, we really can create our own reality, but there are some little tweaks that we can kind of really hone in on along the way too. So we talked about, preparation, because, you started writing again,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that you had probably almost a finished manuscript to give them,
Right.
So I think for somebody
speaks to the inner work.
Yeah.
It's not about them and the manuscript, it's about me doing the work.
Right. Yeah. You doing the preparation, the inward preparation, and then the external will meet the inner.
Yeah.
Very
and I think that
fascinating.
speaks to all the things we talked about earlier too, with social justice or, political alignment. If we can keep looking at what's my work here,
Mm-hmm.
what is the work that I need to do to break down my own belief structures, and I do that through touching into my own trauma, my own grief, so that I'm not projecting that onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to project my anger about not getting published onto this publisher, because that's just going to damage the relationship.
Yeah.
And not going to get me what I want, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So the more we can look inside, the more we can get to what we really want.
So there's a fine line, though. I feel like there's this balance, because somebody may really want something, but then there's this energy of chasing, and they're using this masculine energy rather than the feminine energy of sitting back in flow and allowing it to come to them. So I feel like there's a certain dynamic that needs to be in play as well.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. I'm glad you brought that up. When I say knowing what you really want, that's even more of a constraining force than anything else. If I'm in a conversation with my wife and what I really want is for her to be happy and me to be happy, it's going to constrain me from reacting when she says one of the normal things that, trigger me. So I'm looking at, what do I really want here? Not, does it feel good to be right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the endorphin rush I get, or serotonin rush I get when I feel righteous? Like, I'm looking at the bigger picture of, what do I want to create here?
Right.
And how do I restrain my reactions so I can get to that?
Yeah. Well, I think in going back to the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and though utilizing those approaches, I think if we have any wounded energy around any of those polarities or those energies within us, it can really skew what we want. Because if we're approaching it from a wounded masculine or a wounded feminine,
Mm-hmm.
the outcome is going to be very skewed and very different.
Right.
Say we want, I'll just say we want, I'll say in a relationship, okay, say we want to date a certain guy, okay, but we are approaching it through a wounded masculine energy, and we're like, we have this energy of chasing, right? I mean, they're going to immediately be repelled. So it's just like, it's almost like this. Yeah. It just,
yeah.
And so it's like, if you flip, the visualization that comes into my mind is like a magnet. Instead of them being drawn to each other, okay, magnetically, it's almost like when you have the wounded energy, you have the magnet flipped, so they're repelling.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
And so when you're in the right balanced energy for both, the divine masculine and feminine, you flip the magnet so they're magnetically attracted to each other, and so that of course takes the inner work, to have that balance and to clear stuff, to do your shadow work or whatever, to do your inner child work. But yeah, I mean,
when you can look at that analogy, I like it. You can see it as, you're going to attract the thing that is wounded. So whatever direction your magnet is pointing, you're going to attract that end of somebody else.
That's true. And that's like trauma bonding.
Trauma bonding.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, going back to your point though, everything, whether we think it's negative at first, is going to serve us eventually. Because still, even if it gets us into anger, into resentment, into grief, eventually we can see the lesson in it if we go into our heart space.
Well, it reminds me of something you said earlier about the Buddha. If that anger or resentment or grief is there inside of us, our ultimate goal should be to let it out or to get it out.
That's true.
That was the Buddha's goal, right? So he was happy when the person spit at him because it made him see either he's got anger and he's got to get it out and it'll teach him, or it's not there anymore and he realizes he's graduated.
Yeah, that's very true.
So that's the ultimate freedom that we can gain in this journey, that nothing actually controls us anymore, because if it does, it just teaches us how we're still being controlled.
Yeah.
And then we get to work on that. And if it doesn't, then we know that we're free.
So true. I love it. It was so good to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I brought this beautiful reading from Jeff Foster that I can encourage people to read his work. He's a beautiful author. And I'll just read one line from it.
Please.
About, well, you'll see what it's about. The grief of impermanence and its lover not knowing will crack you open to love. It really will. You will know less than ever before. All your most cherished certainties and beliefs will have collapsed, but you will feel more alive than ever before.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really gorgeous. It's so relevant to what we were talking about.
Yeah. I was really moved by this whole piece. And if folks want to catch up with me online, they can find me at my synchronicityinstitute.com website, where I have some video information, some readings. Both my books are available through there. You can pre-order the book now. It's available online.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
And then I have a course called the Living in Flow course, which puts a lot of these ideas into practice and gives you practical tools to work through whatever's holding you back from authentically expressing your next level of operation. And that's a video online course that's available through the Synchronicity Institute website.
Wonderful. Which I think will be very, very popular, especially with my audience, because they'll want to know, okay, all of these wonderful kind of abstract, esoteric concepts, but how do we put this into practice?
Right. It's very important to me to come up with ways to ground this, because I tend to be a very high in the sky intellectual, coming up with physics ideas, but it doesn't do anything unless we can put it into practice. And my hope and my experience is that we can actually create real change in ourselves that lasts if we understand what's going on inside of us and can transform it. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Sky, thank you so much. And many blessings to you out in California and with your family. And to my audience, I just want to say, don't forget to subscribe and again, hit the bell on the top right so you can be alerted to all of these amazing interviews like the one that I just had with Sky. So have a beautiful rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world. And I will talk to you next time on Guided, helping you navigate your divine journey. Again, thanks, Sky.
Thanks, Jodi. See you later.
Talk to you soon.